There's a particular kind of quiet that comes right before something large moves. Not silence, quiet. The markets are open. Paychecks are still clear. The card still works at the grocery store. The number in your bank account is the same number it was yesterday. By every signal you're taught to trust, the system is fine. And that is exactly the problem, because the thing about a currency is that it almost always looks fine right up until the moment it doesn't. And by the time it stops looking fine, the change has already happened. You're not watching it begin. You're watching it finish. Ray Dalio has spent most of his life studying this exact gap, the distance between how something looks and what is actually happening underneath it. He built one of the largest investment firms in the world, not by predicting headlines, but by studying patterns that repeat across centuries, across empires, across currencies that people were absolutely certain would last forever. And the pattern he keeps returning to is uncomfortable, because it doesn't come with a warning siren. It comes with calm. It comes with a stretch of time where everything seems normal, where the people in charge sound confident, where the ordinary person has no obvious reason to worry. And then the ground shifts, and everyone asks the same question at once. How did we not see this coming? So the real question tonight isn't whether the dollar is going to collapse tomorrow. That's the wrong question, and it's the question that keeps people either panicking or ignoring the whole thing. The real question is stranger and more useful. If a currency can look completely healthy right up until it changes, then how would you ever know you were living in the before? What are the quiet signals that the surface has stopped matching the foundation? And most importantly, what does any of this actually mean for the money you're trying to save, the retirement you're trying to reach, and the ordinary life you're trying to afford? Let's start with what fine actually looks like, because that's where the trap is. A currency doesn't run on gold, or steel, or anything you can hold. It runs on something much more fragile: belief. The dollar in your pocket is worth something because everyone around you agrees it's worth something, and because they believe everyone else will keep agreeing tomorrow. That shared belief is the entire foundation. It's not backed by a vault somewhere. It's backed by confidence. The confidence of the government behind it is stable, that the debt behind it will be honored, that this money will still buy roughly the same life next year that it buys today. And here's the thing about confidence. It's invisible when it's working. You never notice the ground you're standing on till it moves. When confidence is intact, everything looks permanent. Prices feel normal. The dollar feels like a fact of nature, like gravity, like something that was always here and always will be. That feeling of permanence is not evidence that the foundation is solid. It's just what a foundation feels like from the top of it. The people living inside every currency that ever weakened felt exactly this same sense of normal, right until they didn't. Dalio has a phrase for how these shifts actually unfold, and it's worth sitting with because it explains the whole illusion. He says these things happen gradually, then suddenly, gradually, then suddenly, gradually, then suddenly. The gradual part is long and boring and easy to dismiss. It's a slow accumulation of pressure that never quite becomes a crisis, so people learn to ignore it. And because they ignore it for so long, the suddenly, when it finally arrives, feels like it came out of nowhere. But it didn't come out of nowhere. It was building the entire time underneath a surface that looked completely fine. So what's building underneath? This is where it gets personal. And this is where most people stop paying attention right before it matters most. The pressure Dalio points to is debt. Not the abstract kind you read about in a headline and forget. The structural kind. The United States now carries a national debt in the neighborhood of $38 trillion. A number so large it stops meaning anything. And that's part of the danger, because a number you can't feel is a number you can't feel, is a number you can't feel. But strip away the scale and the mechanism is simple, almost household simple. When a country owes far more than it produces and keeps spending more than it takes in, it eventually faces a choice that has almost no good options. It can raise taxes hard, which is painful and politically nearly impossible. It can cut spending hard, which is also painful and politically nearly impossible. Or it can do the quiet thing, the thing that doesn't require a vote or a headline or anyone admitting anything out loud. It can let the money itself lose value. It can create more dollars to cover its obligations, and in doing so, quietly reduce what each existing dollar is worth. And this is the move that looks fine while it's happening because nobody announces it. There's no press conference where someone says, "We are now devaluing your savings." It just shows up slowly, as the strange sense that everything costs a little more than it used to, and your paycheck stretches a little less than it did. That's the part that reaches all the way down to your kitchen table, because when we talk about the dollar changing, it can sound like a problem for governments and billionaires and people who trade currencies for a living. It isn't. The value of the dollar is the value of your entire financial life. It's the purchasing power of every dollar you've saved. It's whether the retirement number you've been working toward will still buy the retirement you imagine. It's whether your emergency fund is still an emergency fund in 10 years or just a smaller cushion wearing the same name. When the dollar quietly weakens, nobody takes money out of your account. The number stays the same. What changes is what that number can do, and that is a robbery you can't see, committed against a victim who was told everything was fine. Now here's where the surface and the foundation start to visibly separate. And this is the middle of the story, the part that reframes everything before it. For years, his strongest argument for the dollar was simple. Sure, it has problems, but where else would the world go? Every other currency has issues too. The dollar is the least dirty shirt in the laundry. It's the reserve currency of the planet, the thing central banks hold, the thing global trade runs on. That status has protected the dollar for decades, and it created a comforting logic. The dollar can't really fall because there's nowhere else to run. But Dalio's point cuts underneath that comfort. And this is the insight that separates a serious analysis from a scary one. The question was never whether people would abandon the dollar entirely and overnight. That's the cartoon version, the collapse clock version. The real shift is quieter and far more revealing. It's what happens when the world slowly, calmly, without any announcement, starts looking for other places to store value. Not fleeing. Just diversifying. Just quietly deciding that maybe it's wise not to keep quite so many eggs in one basket. And you can already see the fingerprints of that decision if you know where to look. Look at what actually happened recently. In a single year, the dollar fell dramatically against gold. Dalio himself pointed out a decline of nearly 40% measured against gold in 1 year, alongside meaningful drops against currencies like the euro and the Swiss franc. Gold, meanwhile, had one of its strongest years in memory. And here's the reframe that most people miss entirely. A soaring gold price is usually reported as good news, as an exciting rally, as a number going up. But Dalio flips the lens. He argues that gold surging isn't really gold getting stronger. It's often money getting weaker. When you measure the stock market not in dollars but in gold, a market that looked like it was winning can suddenly look like it was quietly losing ground the whole time. The scoreboard said everything was fine. The scoreboard was measured in a shrinking ruler. That's the hidden mechanism. When the yardstick itself is shrinking, everything measured by it looks bigger than it really is. Your investments can rise in dollar terms and still be losing real purchasing power. Your salary can go up and still buy less. The economy can post good numbers while the ground underneath quietly gives way. This is why the surface can look so healthy during the exact period when the foundation is changing the most. The instruments we use to measure fine are all denominated in the very thing that's weakening. It's like trying to notice that your ruler is shrinking by measuring it with itself. And this is where confidence becomes the whole game, because confidence is not a slow, rational thing. It's patient, and then it's not. People will tolerate a slowly weakening currency for a remarkably long time. They'll absorb higher prices, they'll grumble, they'll adjust, they'll keep believing, right up until something shifts in the collective mood and belief tips. Dalio describes it as a crisis of confidence. And the reason it's so dangerous is that confidence doesn't erode in a straight, predictable line you can watch on a chart. It holds, and then it moves all at once, because the moment enough people start to doubt, everyone else's doubt becomes rational too. Nobody wants to be the last one holding a weakening thing. The gradually is people ignoring the pressure. The suddenly is everyone noticing it in the same week. Think about what that means for the ordinary person, because this is the part that should actually change how you think, not how much you panic. The people most exposed to this kind of shift are almost never the wealthy. The very wealthy already hold their money in a spread of things: property, businesses, gold, assets in different countries, things that hold value when a currency doesn't. When the dollar quietly weakens, their wealth largely moves with it or around it. The person who gets hit hardest is the one who did everything they were told to do. The one who worked, saved carefully in cash, trusted the system, and kept the faith that a dollar saved would be a dollar's worth of life later. That person is the most exposed, precisely because they believe the surface. Their loyalty to fine is the thing that costs them. That's the cruel arithmetic underneath all of this. And it's why Dalio frames what he calls the affordability issue as one of the defining pressures of our time. It's not an abstract economic debate. It's the widening gap between what people earn and what a normal life costs. The sense that groceries, housing, insurance, and the basic machinery of a middle-class existence keep drifting further out of reach, even as the official numbers insist things are okay. That gap is what a quietly weakening currency feels like from the inside. It doesn't feel like a collapse. It feels like working just as hard as before and somehow falling a little behind year after year without ever being told why. So let's zoom out to the biggest layer, the one that makes this more than a story about one country in one decade. Dalio's whole framework comes from studying 500 years of rising and falling powers, and the pattern is almost eerily consistent. Empires rise on productivity and sound money and earn trust. They gain the privilege of having the world's reserve currency, which is an enormous advantage. It lets them borrow more cheaply and spend more freely than anyone else. And then, over time, that very privilege becomes the trap, because the ability to borrow freely eventually becomes the habit of borrowing too much. The debt piles up. The temptation to quietly devalue the money grows. And the same currency that symbolized the empire's strength slowly becomes the thing that reveals its decline. Every dominant currency in history followed some version of this arc, and the people living at the peak of each one believed, sincerely, that their money was permanent. That belief was not stupidity. It was the natural feeling of standing on a foundation that hadn't moved yet. The Dutch felt it. The British felt it. And it's worth being honest and careful here. Dalio is not saying the dollar collapses tomorrow, and neither am I. He's not selling a date on a doomsday clock. What he's describing is a long process, a shifting of trust and flow that can take years, even decades, and that unfolds mostly in the quiet. The point isn't to be afraid. The point is to stop mistaking the quiet for safety. Because here's the deepest version of the whole idea, the thing worth taking with you when everything else fades. The change in a currency is not really an event. We imagine it as a moment, a crash, a headline, a single terrible day. But it isn't. It's a slow transfer of trust that you can only clearly see in the rearview mirror. There's no alarm that goes off when confidence starts to leak. No notification on your phone that says the foundation has begun to move. The whole reason it works this way, the whole reason it can look fine right up until it changes, is that the change is made of the same invisible material the stability was made of, belief holding, and then belief letting go. You don't feel the tide going out. You just eventually notice you're standing on wet sand where the water used to be. So what do you actually do with this? Not panic. Panic is just fear bait, and it makes people do foolish things. And I'm not here to tell you to buy anything or sell anything, because I'm not a financial advisor and this isn't advice. What this is a lens. The single most valuable thing you can take from Dalio's way of thinking isn't a prediction. It's a habit of mind. The refusal to confuse looks fine with is fine. The willingness to ask what the surface is measured in and whether the yardstick itself is holding steady. The awareness that the people who navigate these shifts well are not the ones who panic and not the ones who ignore it, but the ones who understand it early enough to think clearly while everyone else is still comforted by the calm. Because when the change finally becomes obvious to everyone, when it makes the news, when your neighbor is suddenly talking about it, that's not the beginning. That's suddenly. That's the part that arrives after the gradual part is already finished. The window to understand it, to think about it calmly, to make thoughtful decisions about your own financial life without fear of rushing the wheel. That window is open now, in the quiet, precisely because it still looks fine. The quiet isn't your reassurance. The quiet is the message, and that's the whole strange truth of it. The dollar-licking fine is not evidence that nothing is happening. It might be the most honest description of exactly the moment Dalio spends his life trying to help people recognize, the long calm before, where the surface and the foundation are quietly drifting apart and almost no one is looking down. If this way of seeing the world made something click, if it changed the way you'll read the next "Everything is Fine" headline, then consider subscribing. Because this is the kind of thinking we do here. Not fear, not hype, not a countdown to collapse, but the patient work of understanding the machinery underneath the money you live on. In the next breakdown, we're going deeper into where quiet money actually goes when confidence starts to shift. The assets, the countries, the historical patterns of where trust migrates when a currency changes. And I'd genuinely like to hear from you in the comments. Do you feel the gap Dalio is describing in your own life? The sense that a normal life costs more than the numbers admit? Tell me what you're seeing from where you're standing. Because the more of us who learn to notice the quiet, the fewer of us get caught believing the surface. Stay thoughtful, stay early, and I'll see you in the next one.